I died on a Tuesday night. It was raining, cold. My fingers were numb, my breathing ragged. I was on the ground, choking on my own blood. Above me, my killer stood over me, his face hidden in the darkness. "You weren't supposed to see," he whispered. I tried to move, but my body wouldn't respond. My vision faded. The last thing I heard was my own heartbeat, slowing, stopping. Then I woke up. I sat up gasping. But something was wrong. The air was too light. My body felt too small. My hands, tiny. I was in a child's bed. The wallpaper was familiar, stars and moons, the same pattern from my childhood room. I turned and my heart stopped. A mirror. A 6-year-old boy stared back at me. Brown hair, wide, terrified eyes. "Mister, I wasn't supposed to be here. I wasn't supposed to be alive." But I was. And I remembered everything. My childhood, my teenage years, my first love, my first job, my death. And worst of all, I remembered my killer. A man I had never met before. A man who was still out there. And if he was still out there, he could kill me again. I tried to tell my parents. I begged them, crying, screaming, telling them I wasn't really a kid, that I had died, that someone had murdered me. My father frowned. My mother placed a hand on my forehead. "You're burning up," she murmured. They didn't believe me. Of course they didn't. To them, I was just their 6-year-old son. To me, I was a dead man wearing a child's skin. And the worst part, I had no idea how much time I had left. Days passed. I forced myself to play along, to act like a normal child. But at night, I planned. I needed to find him, find my killer. I wrote down everything I remembered about the night I died, the date, the street I was on, what I was doing before it happened. But there was one problem. I had never seen his face, only his voice. "You weren't supposed to see." Then, one evening, I heard it, a voice in the hallway, talking to my father, his voice. I froze. My body locked up. It was him. It was him. The voice was softer, but it was him. I was sure of it. I crept toward the door, heart hammering. My father was laughing, friendly conversation. I peered through the crack of the door. A man stood there, shaking hands with my father, smiling. I recognized his watch, his coat, the same ones from that night. My killer wasn't a stranger. He was someone my family knew. I couldn't breathe. He was in my house, laughing with my parents, drinking coffee in our kitchen. And the worst part, he looked younger too. Not as old as I remembered. Not as old as the night he killed me. This was years before it happened, which meant he hadn't done it yet. I needed to stop him, but I was just a kid. No one would believe me. So I made a plan, a stupid one. That night, I snuck into my father's office, found his old pocket knife. I would wait until my killer was alone. Then I would end this before it began. The next time he came over, I would stab him. But when I woke up the next morning, my mother was crying, my father was pale, and my sister was missing. This wasn't how it happened. I didn't have a sister in my past life. I never had a sister, but now I did, and she was gone. My killer hadn't killed me, not yet, because this time he took her instead. And somehow the timeline had changed. I ran away that night, ran into the streets, ran to where I remembered dying. But the city wasn't the same. The street names were different. The buildings had changed. The past wasn't how I remembered it. I stopped, breathing hard. My hands trembled. I knew where my killer would be. I knew what I had to do, but I was afraid. Then I felt it, a presence behind me. "You weren't supposed to see." I turned. A shadow stepped forward, the same coat, the same watch. But it wasn't him. It was me. I froze. The older version of me stared back. His eyes were hollow, face emotionless. "Finally," he murmured. I stepped back. What is this?" The other me smiled. "You weren't supposed to see." I tried to run, but he was faster than I ever was. His hand grabbed my wrist. His grip was ice cold. My body locked up, and in that moment, I understood. I had never escaped the loop. I had just switched places. My mind screamed, but my voice never came. By the way, if you want to see more scary stories like this, don't forget to show some love by hitting the like and sub button. It helps a lot. Until next time.